I really want to be in a boy band. I'd love to be an Olympic gymnast. I'd like to be a bus driver. If you went down to the local school today and asked the kids what they wanted to be when they grew up, they'd probably say things like that, wouldn't they? People asked me that question a long time ago, and I told them I wanted to be a Catholic priest. Let's just say I failed the interview. But going back to school, I know what those kids are very unlikely to say. Take Peter. He's not going to come and say, I want to make integrated glass solutions. Paul is unlikely to say, I want to do things with polycarbonate that people only dreamed of. And if Mary said, I want to take aluminium rivets to the next level, her mum would say, probably time for a chat. Of course kids aren't going to say things like that, because the subject matter sounds absolutely boring. Certainly nothing to make a career out of. Imagine you're sitting at a dinner party and the person next door to you says, very proudly, I work for the factory that makes that pipe that comes out the back of your toilet. Well, I would love to be at that dinner party. He sounds like my ideal guest, because I'm a bit of an infrastructure nerd. It's going to be very popular. I'm really interested in what's under the skin of things. All the nuts, bolts, connections, wires, things like that. Even, dare I say it, flange pieces, which you should Google. Because, as I'm going to try and demonstrate, I think it's the so-called boring things that can make extraordinary things happen, even though we don't really notice them. I have two inexpensive props. Here comes the first. It's not a trick question, but what do you see, if you can see it? It's a space shuttle, yes. The most advanced machine that man had ever made at the time. The world's first reusable space vehicle, capable of taking man into lower orbit and back, and landing as routinely as a budget airline. You know, really bumpy. Only with more legroom and luggage allowance. But although this looks very space-age and sleek and absolutely fantastic, iconic, underneath it, as I'm about to explain, there were loads and loads of really boring and mundane pieces that made it work. And actually, it's these pieces that would ultimately be the success and, unfortunately, on a couple of occasions, the failure of the shuttle. Now, to demonstrate this a bit more fully, I need another cheap prop. These are X-ray specs. They work. Now, X-ray specs were routinely given away in boys' comics when I was a boy. The comics were in black and white, obviously, then. And what they promised every eight-year-old boy was the ability to look through the clothes of their friend's sister and see her pants. Millions were sold. So I'd like you, throughout the talk, to imagine you're wearing these glasses. Because when you wear them, you see things as they really are. You can actually see things. There's a gentleman on the second row there who needs to know that leather underwear went out of fashion last year. Now, if you were looking at the space shuttle, I don't have the full kit to show you here, but to get it into outer space, it needed to be strapped onto a couple of giant rockets and an absolutely enormous fuel tank. I'm no expert, but that seems to me like a bit dangerous. Two enormous naked flames next to a fuel tank. It's a bit like inviting members of the Fire Eater Society to a barbecue, smokers only, at the local petrol station while they're filling up with petrol. NASA thought about this, and they decided to cover the fuel tank in a very specialized material. the one and only foam. Now, it's a very special kind of foam, but it's a foam not dissimilar from the foam you're probably sitting in, or the foam in your sofa at home or your mattress, just a slightly different chemical composition. Now, they thought of everything apart from one thing, an intergalactic predator, otherwise known as the woodpecker. In 1985, NASA discovered that nesting woodpeckers had pecked over 70 holes into the outside shell. So a mission had to be delayed until they patched it up. Okay, so we've got our fuel ready, we've got our rockets ready to fire. With our X-ray specs on, we can see, in fact, that the space shuttle is made out of aluminium, or aluminum as they probably would have called it. And aluminium is fantastic because it's very light and it's very easy to work with. The only slight snag is that it doesn't like it when it gets really hot. About 160, 170 degrees centigrade, it behaves rather erratically. And NASA had estimated that the temperature on re-entry would be 10 times that amount. So what they needed was some way of protecting, particularly the base of the space shuttle. And I have a theory as to how this happened. I have no proof, but I think this is probably how they did it. Bob from NASA has spent all weekend redecorating his bathroom. And he's having a nice hot bath to celebrate. There's lots of steam, it's very hot, which is the important part. So he's scrubbing his back, and he's thinking, you did a really good job, Bob, on that bathroom, if you say so yourself. And then he thinks, that's it. Let's coat the bottom of the shuttle with tiles. And that's exactly what they did. About 2,500 ceramic tiles were put on the base of the space shuttle. They were a bit more special than the ones you would use. They all had a unique code, so that if one fell off, it could be put back on. But they were tiles, and they were glued on by NASA's own admission by a substance very similar to the tiling glue you would use at home. So they tiled the whole basis of the shuttle in that. A very, very ordinary thing for a space-age vehicle. You can just imagine Bob from the bath going to work the next day, and he meets Bob in the corridor, conveniently called Bob, for the purpose of the story. Hey, Bob. I hear you've cracked the problem of the temperature on the space shuttle. Yes, Bob, I have. It's called TPS. TPS, Bob? What's that? Apologies for the uncannily realistic American accents here. What's TPS, Bob? Thermal protection system. And what's that? Well, Bob, that's classified information. Go on, Bob, you can tell me. Well, Bob, it's tiles just like in your bathroom. Now, NASA put a lot of confidence in these tiles. If a tile falls off while you're having a shower, it's probably not a matter of life or death. But up to 8 humans could be traveling in this vehicle at the time. They also put a lot of confidence in that foam. Now, it may surprise you, but in all of the missions, it was quite a normal thing for bits of foam to fall off as the rockets took off. And on one occasion, they got a little bit worried about it because the foam looked quite big. It was actually described as a suitcase-sized bit of foam, which is strange. This suitcase bit of foam shot down and hit the shuttle, the orbiter, and NASA were worried. But once they'd watched the videos, they weren't too worried. They thought it was okay. It's quite a regular thing. They even told the astronauts who were in orbit at the time, and they were fine about it. But actually, this little bit of foam, this ordinary, boring bit of foam, had torn a hole right through the leading edge of one of the wings, right through the carbon fiber, everything. And eventually, it would be the thing that led to the total destruction of this space shuttle when it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. So an ordinary thing like foam, completely ruining things. Now, I know what you're thinking. Is there anything more boring than foam? Glass. I really like glass. So what I call Windows 81 was actually the glass that they used in the first space shuttle. It was the biggest piece of glass ever made, but it was no ordinary glass. It was triple glazed, which for glass fans is a big treat. 3 sheets of glass combined. Okay? Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, it gets a little bit flashy. And I can't put sunglasses on because I've got a space helmet on. So this glass needs to be tinted. And that's exactly what they did. So NASA turned to a highly advanced substance for tinting called ink. They actually used the same ink to tint the glass as they did in the dollar bills. So once again, it's an example of something that's extremely straightforward. In fact, the space shuttle was full of ordinary things. If you took the lid off it, you'd find hundreds of dials, knobs, rotary switches, push switches, diagnostic equipment, lights that flash on and off, machines that go ping, all that kind of stuff. And none of these in itself is particularly unusual. When you leave here and go home tonight and you push your light on in your apartment, that's probably a rocker switch for switch fans. Or someone rings your doorbell, it's a push switch. These were all inside the space shuttle. Lots of things in this room were similar to the things inside the space shuttle. So it wasn't all rocket science. It was science in a rocket, okay? And not all the parts on a shuttle were new towards the end. Seriously. Over the 30 years of the space shuttle's missions, some of the companies that made the parts went bust. So what do? They went to eBay to find the parts. Thankfully, not that many. You can just imagine, can't you, with the people at NASA, they would only buy on an auction when it was down to the last 10 seconds, so they got a really good countdown. Okay, back to serious business. The most frightening and dangerous part of the mission was landing the space shuttle, because in 45 minutes you go from orbit to hitting the ground. And although you always see a space shuttle with rockets coming out the back of it, these are only boosters which determine where the plane lands into the Earth's atmosphere. It has to be in the right position. So there's a rocket thrust, then you're on your own. This has no engines anymore. It's the world's most sophisticated glider. And landing it is a bit like landing a plane on the Hudson River with no engines, except you're probably traveling about 17,000 miles an hour. So all those bathroom tiles on the bottom and all that tiling cement is probably getting a little bit shaky now. So it's a question now of tilting things and dropping the wheels down, which can't come back up again once you put them down. And all of those little devices that you have on an ordinary plane, hinges. There's a hinge on the back of the space shuttle that's held in place with 10 bolts, which is remarkable, 10 ordinary bolts, doing an extraordinary job. Eventually, it's time for the space shuttle to land, and it's rubber that hits the tarmac, rubber like on an ordinary jet. Parachutes come out the back, like people jump out of planes on. Absolutely extraordinary. How did it stay up? How did it come down? Eventually, it comes to a standstill, and they take it away and put it in the garage and do a refurbishment. Absolutely remarkable. I've seen videos of people inside the space shuttle doing the refurbishment. And if you hadn't told me it was a space shuttle, I would say it was the local power station or that room under the swimming pool with all the pipes. Ordinary men and women with spanners and screwdrivers and overalls on, doing ordinary, mundane things and taking a real pride in it. Someone needs to check the welding. Someone needs to look for hairline cracks in the windshield at the front. Someone needs to show the parachute. Someone needs to put on a wetsuit and jump into an ordinary, albeit very big, swimming pool and teach the astronauts what it feels like to operate in zero gravity. These are all ordinary things. And it's when you get down to this totally infrastructural level, you begin to see how things actually work. And I think it would do us all good from time to time, even if you're not an infrastructure nerd like me, to look at things in that degree of detail. so that you can realize the absolute vital role these parts play in our everyday life, in this increasingly interconnected world we live in. Not everyone was put on planet Earth to develop intellectual property. We need the internet, we need these visionary people, we need apps, but we also need things. And it's Peter, Paul, and Mary from the school, from the beginning of the story, that we need to get enthusiastic about making them. So just as an exercise, what would be great from time to time is if we look at this detail. So we look at the zips and the cotton and the rivets instead of the jeans, the magnets instead of the headphones, the picture hook instead of the Mona Lisa, the vinyl rather than the Bowie Space Oddity album. I think it's really important to look at this level so we can see the value of these components. What do you see now? Do you see a revolutionary space vehicle? Or do you see a container for all these various bits and pieces that work together in extraordinary circumstances? I hope you see both, because it's my contention that it's these really so-called boring bits and pieces that make extraordinary things happen. Thank you very much.